Rob, welcome back. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good to see you again. Things I'm sure it's going well. No complaints on your end, or
No complaints. We've got a little bit of a heat wave here in Southern California, which is kind of rare for us at the coast, but we're surviving.
yeah, that heat wave thing has been going everywhere. I mean, here in Texas, it's been so hot in the summer, and then this week, it's the first week of September. Like the rain hasn't stopped. Today was like the first day where, the flash flooding and all that craziness. My wife and I lost power. Actually, it was nuts. But weird weather that we're having, Rob. I don't know what it is, but at least everyone's kind of experiencing it.
Yeah, not sure. Maybe another iceberg broke off the continental shelf.
That might be the case. Well, before we started recording, I know that you mentioned that you're kind of on the road right now doing some speaking engagements, and y'all have some type of participation or nomination at the Benzinga conference. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this last month was our kind of an idle month for us. Usually, I'm doing quite a bit of traveling for our company. We start again next Monday. We're headed to Chicago for the Benzinga event. Normally, their flagship event is in Miami each year, but because of COVID, this event has actually got more attendees than even their flagship event. So there was a lot of pent-up demand. And we were just informed last week that we are a finalist of three of the most innovative lenders in the country for cannabis lending. So hopefully, I think we've got a decent shot at winning since there's only three people left as a finalist. So we'll see how that goes. The other two peers are we know them, and they're great lenders as well. So looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on the nomination. Best of luck to you. We'll be sure to follow and check out the results of that. But that is actually a great segue because that's really your bread and butter. Is on the private equity side, the capital markets, and it's really great to have you on because there's so much going on right now, especially with the Fed repeatedly hiking interest rates and the economy kind of, on the downward spiral. And so, this is a good conversation to kind of set the stage. And, for those listening or watching that may be looking to access capital or to enter the market, just kind of get some insights. So let's start right there. I mean, kind of set the landscape for us and kind of what's the current state when it comes to the cannabis industry.
Well, there's kind of two sides for us. So for our borrowers, their ability to go out and raise capital has really dried up or substantially been reduced even prior to the markets, becoming more volatile earlier this year in March or so. And so that lack of equity out there has made made our borrowers more really interested in trying to figure out what are the debt options available and how far can I take the equity that I've got, or how can I minimize the equity I need to raise in order to maximize the ROI that I get from that equity. So we continue to see more deals than we ever thought we would see in our lifetime. We always have lots of inflow, but it just continues to grow. And some of our publicly traded peers, I think, are having some price volatility of their own share price. And that affects their ability to issue more shares, to raise equity and dilute their investors. If you're diluting at a higher share price, it's inconsequential. But when you're near or below your book value, that becomes a significant challenge. And so at this point, it seems like we're one of the few that still has the capital and the capacity to drive through this. And we had prognosticated that was one of the reasons that we wanted to remain private, is to have no share volatility for our share price. But we also believe that this asset class is going to do better in a real estate downturn or a market an economic downturn which we think it will do, and it has proven that in COVID before. So that's on the borrower side. From our investor side, we're still actively able to raise capital. Investors have found it more comfortable to be coming into a fund that has security of a senior lien recorded on commercial assets, personal guarantees, making monthly distributions, and the tax saving structure of a private mortgage REIT. We're still maintaining our target yields of net 12% to our investors. And so investors like the fact that there's no volatility to our share price because we're privately held. And that's a really important thing to people, or at least to have that balance in your portfolio of yeah, you might be able to have liquidity out of a stock, but you don't really want to have liquidity when it's below what you purchased it at. And so we've always got liquidity and the ability to bring investors in and out every single month.
Mm-hmm. Couple of follow-up questions for both those, I guess, groups, right? So on the investor side, I mean, I get the value proposition that y'all, present, being privately held, having the liquidity. So do they also see just the huge potential in the cannabis industry overall, even though the economy is where it's at? But, kind of like this, like you mentioned before, it's pretty, fail-proof when it comes to like COVID and whatnot.
I don't think our investors are coming to invest with us because they are looking for some enormous return in 5 or 10 years because of the size of the market. I think investors come to invest with us for that outsized yield that we get from this asset class. And if we were in a traditional non-cannabis market, the yield would probably be several hundred basis points lower. And I think that the investors are taking advantage of that mispriced yield out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think that that's what they're looking for, because you're just going to get a monthly return on your principal, and you can pull your principal back at any time. And so I think that that's why they're there. They're not really here trying to get a 10x return, because that's not going to happen. You would have to be in our fund for 4.2 years to get 100% of your return on your principal.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then you mentioned on the borrowers, you mentioned debt equity. So how can borrowers be strategic about their debt to equity ratio?
Well, I think that anytime you're looking at what your options are, you want to minimize how much equity you're going to need, or maximize how much debt you can get off of the equity you have. And so you always want to talk with a lender. I think you need to start there before you go do your equity raises, to know what are the parameters, what is the minimum that I'm going to need, as opposed to going out and raising equity and then not knowing if that was sufficient for what you want to accomplish. That is a very difficult proposition as a person who's raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on thousands of transactions. You only want to go to your investors one time to tell them what the deal is. You don't want to come back to them after you just raised a bunch of equity and say, okay, now we've got a loan, but we're going to need this much more equity. It sets a bad taste in their mouth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what other types of homework or research can borrowers do before talking to a lender?
So you need to know the different types of lending that are going on. So everything has been bulked into debt lending, but there's numerous different types of debt. There's corporate debt models, which is, or we refer to the BDC model, which is they're lending to the value of the enterprise value of your cannabis company, your accounts receivable, your license for that cannabis operation, and the real estate. Substantially higher lending basis to use, but extremely restrictive terms of how the covenants are set for that loan and what you can and can't do with your own company. So the lender's got their arms around you, and you're really constrained on what you can and can't do. Also, what's the purpose of the loan? Is the purpose of the loan to build a facility? If it's to build a facility, you need a lender that is got experience in doing that. You need to be able to process those draws seamlessly and get reimbursed quickly on that, because that most of our borrowers that came into cannabis had never had a construction loan, and they didn't understand and realize the importance of having unlimited amounts of draws like we do, and being able to fund those approved draws within 3 days. That's enormously important because most borrowers have never had a construction loan. They don't understand that even though we might have agreed to give you 10 million, that's a $10 million budget that we've approved. You still have to advance the money first, and then we reimburse you. Most people have no clue that that's how that construction loans work. And it is a little bit counterintuitive. I understand why they would think that. And so that's an enormously important aspect. So you really need to understand the different types of debt and what you're trying to achieve. If you're just trying to build out a facility, you might want to get a construction loan for that particular leg of the transaction. There's going to be more value for that facility, and your enterprise value would be more if you're going to try to go to a different type of loan at a later date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, basically like due diligence, right? I mean, a lot of it is you don't know what you don't know, but really, anticipating actual costs for the whole project, and just some of that due diligence work. And I like how you also spoke from like the lender's perspective. So, what else do the lenders look for, when underwriting these deals, or how do they calculate the amount of money that they're, issuing?
So we have two different types of loan products. We have our bridge value add product, which is for acquisition or refinance to expand or build a facility from ground up, or improve a facility that's already built. That would include the ground up construction costs, the tenant improvement costs, and the equipment for that project. We would consider all three of those items part of the cost, including the purchase of the property. So purchase price, building cost, which would be ground up construction or tenant improvements, and equipment. Whatever that total is, let's just say it was 10 million is the total cost to build. We would call that 100% of the cost to build. We want to make sure that when you build the facility, that the tenant is able to operate there and pay the rent once that facility is built, so it can be stabilized. In that particular lending model, we would require 40% of the borrower to come in with 40%, and we would lend up to 60%. That's the typical model for that type of product. Now, on the fully stabilized loan, once your facility is completely built and it's cash flowing, the tenant's cash flowing, and things are normalized, then we have a lower cost loan, slightly lower rate, and a longer term that you can step down into, and that we go up to 75% loan to cost basis on that. So that's called a loan to cost basis. We go up to 60% loan to cost, which means the borrower has to come in with 40% of cash. And on our other type of loan, it is a 75% max loan to cost basis that we'll go up to. Got you.
And I know this is like a little off of the topic of what you were saying, but like from the borrower's perspective, in this current market, the environment that we talked about, the Fed is continually raising the interest rates. Like, why shouldn't borrowers lead with that? Why didn't they just go for the lowest interest rate, and maybe look at costs holistically instead?
So there's more factors to just your interest rate. Most people have only had their own mortgage for their house, or know about their parents' mortgage, or whatever it is. They may not have had a lot of exposure to different transactions for debt. In reality, what you're trying to do is get the highest return on your equity. So you could go to a bank, and let's go back to that $10 million transaction for the total cost, the acquisition, the improvements, and the equipment, all of that. We would go up to 60% of that, or $6 million, to build that $10 million cost basis. But a bank might look at that same transaction and say, we're only willing to lend you $4 million, but we'll give it to you at 8%, and Pelorus is going to give it to you in the mid-teens. Well, what did it cost you to raise the delta of that money between the 4 million and the 6 million, that $2 million? That's the equation you need to be looking at. You're selling your company at the worst possible time to raise that additional money. So was it better to take it on a short term at a higher interest rate, and then come back and try to raise money if you needed to? Or is it better to take the lower rate that doesn't achieve anything that you're trying to do other than a low rate? And banks don't do construction loans well. They typically don't even do them to begin with. I don't even know if there's any of them that are doing cannabis construction loans at this time. We do track about 4 dozen of them that are doing lending, but it's probably only for fully stabilized transactions. So that's not even a fair comparison.
Mhm. Well, I want to get to Pelorus Equity Group, and all that you're focused on in the remainder of 2022, and the next fiscal year. But is there any other issues or topics that you'd like to cover in terms of the current landscape before we move on?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask us about the California market. It's our backyard and what's happening here. And what I try to say is that the cannabis market in California, this is the largest market in the world under one basis of licensing that exists with the most population that I'm aware of at this time. And that's a really important thing to realize. And we think it's probably around $6 to $8 billion, this particular market at this time. And so that revenue is going to flow through this market every year, regardless of how profitable or unprofitable the companies are. And so that is an important thesis to start with. There's going to be companies that were doing okay because there was less competition, or they had it working for a while, and now they're less efficient and they're not doing as well as new tenants and new cannabis operators start emerging and doing better. And so the competition is very, very intense in California. And what's happened is most people just talk about the cannabis market in general as an oversupply in cannabis in California, but in reality, the general oversupply is the outdoor wholesale market that all came on the market typically in October. Maybe you get one more turn on the crop, but that market was traditionally being sold at wholesale to some prospective buyers, but it was being sold to cannabis brands that didn't have their own cultivation for themselves. And that has changed in California. When you're making enormous amounts of investments in your brand in California, you can't afford to have any volatility of your shares price, I'm sorry, of your purchase price or of the quality of production. So most of the brands are making investments in their own cultivation. All of our borrowers are owner users. I think maybe once or twice we've had some people that the whole facility wasn't just owner user, but they're in control of their own destiny. So now they're selling to themselves. And so they've eliminated that price disparity that's out there. And so what's happening is that the market is evolving in California from a primarily outdoor wholesale market to now brands are growing from themselves. Some are still going to grow outdoor, but that market is evolving. So that's one thing that people we try to talk about a little bit. And the other thing is what the political landscape is. Every month we're just about to get it. It's just about to pass. We got legislation right there. and I always go back to when the Biden administration first came into office day one. I said, you're going to know where we stand with the Biden administration. They can reinstate the Cole memo day one, and they did. And so that would have driven it from the executive branch, which is not where law starts, but it would show the signaling of where things are going. I do think Biden would sign any cannabis legislation that made it to his desk, but I don't see the Republicans and the Democrats agreeing on what level of social justice needs to be attached for the decriminalization side of cannabis legislation as opposed to the regulation side. So I think that's where the disparity is. And I don't think that you're going to be able to get to the 60 votes needed in the Senate, because you're going to need Republicans to sign off on that. And that's going to become more and more challenging as we get to the midterms here. So if they're going to do anything, if they're ever going to compromise, it would be the Democrats that I think that need to compromise on the level of the social equity justice, basically the decriminalization, which is very important to do. But I think that the way that they're going about it to get the Republicans to agree, that's where the disparity is. And I just don't see either party coming into an agreement there.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to unpack with both those topics. First, I want to go back to the California market. So that is super interesting to me because, so what you mentioned is it's not just before the land was, there's outdoor cultivation at a commercial scale that was being sold to legacy brands, really up and coming brands, right? Because they're sourcing their flower. They're a brand. They're not vertically integrated. But now, as they're getting more capital and as they're growing, they're starting to become not vertically integrated, but I guess they're including cultivation as a part of their supply chain. Uh, Very interesting. And that's like the natural progression, right? I mean, I'm talking to brands in New Mexico right now, and they're taking the brand route. But eventually I talk to the owners and they're like, I want to ultimately cultivate so that I can have ultimate control over my crop, my yield, consistency, like you mentioned.
Well, you're trying to de-risk the business venture to begin with, and just to start a brand, just the marketing with it, and you're going to go buy from different. You're going to pick a strain, and you're going to go buy all that product, and you don't want to have to buy a building. You can just run your business out of your home, and have a brand and have a workforce that's distributed selling your products, and it's being drop shipped to those dispensaries from wherever. But eventually you'll if that brand starts to take off, then you say, okay, where's the next economies of scale, and where are things fluctuating and putting us into stress. And sometimes the market will be good, where you can get the cannabis for a lower price than what you might be able to grow it, because there's an oversupply in the market. But maybe you got it, maybe you didn't, maybe it didn't match what you have for your quality of your brand. If you put out an inferior quality under your brand, you're done. Your brand
Yep.
equity has just disappeared. So brands, as they get more and more developed, and as the market that they're selling to becomes more mature and the buyers become more distinct on what they're looking for, the brands don't have that luxury anymore. California, Colorado, the states that have been out there longer are much more refined buyers than for a new emerging. New York will be kind of a free-for-all for a little bit, because the legal brands, there won't be one that rises to the top right away. Well, maybe there will, but it's not the same as when you've got everybody is very established and consistent on everything that they're doing, no matter what. Even if a guy from California is a top tier operator, goes to New York, it takes time to get that facility operating in that new environment, and those supply lines and those distribution routes and everything to work so that it's consistent and it maintains quality throughout the year. It's going to be more difficult in those countries, those states, with a bigger disparity of temperature changes and humidity, and how they're going to regulate that indoor facility, because even that changes some of the environment there.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, and that's funny. They operate like countries really right now. I mean, when it comes to, the relations and compliance among states. So I get there. But so what you're saying basically is, even if like the challenges of even expanding into a new state, the quality and the consistency, it's going to take a while to get dialed in, because even everything's automated through technology, it still has to it's going to be different than the climate and the room temperature and the delivery route and how long it takes. Everything, right, is just different. There's
Everything,
different
like you could have
variables.
your facility top dead center, but the distributor doesn't get it to the shelf on time, and you've lost some of the shelf life of what that product is going to be there. But I would like to say that one of my positions has evolved. I used to say that if we did have federal legalization, that the other states are just going to get crushed by California, because it's the namesake of where most of the experience has ever been developed, and it's kind of like Napa wines. It's just where it would be coming from the country. But I have toured some facilities in this last year, one in New Jersey, which is a very recent facility, and I've had to change my position. These guys who we're looking at doing a deal with here, they had product that was equivalent to California. So I didn't think it was possible to get it going that quickly to that level. So it is evolving, and I did have to evolve what my bias was of California being the epicenter of the best growing stuff in the country. But
Right.
but there are some very sophisticated people across this country, from New Jersey to Florida, that are figuring it out, and it's amazing to watch.
It's amazing, right? I mean, yeah, there's master growers that are planted all throughout the country, and it's really just a matter of, like you said, kind of playing with what they've got at their disposal, the environment, the temperature, the technology, and making it all work. And I've got to say, I had the same kind of realization. I went to New Mexico and just, did a whole dispensary tour around Albuquerque, Santa Fe, the Valencia County area. And I mean, some of the dispensaries I walked in, shout out to Prohibition 37. I mean, the flower was, like you said, equivalent to California. And I believe some of the growers at P37 are from California. So they've kind of brought their skill. Not to say that there isn't native New Mexicans that are master growers, but yeah. So the other topic that you mentioned was the political atmosphere that's currently, the political climate that we're currently in, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I want to dive into it a bit more though. So you mentioned the Republicans they won't get the votes from the Republicans because the Democrats, especially the progressive Democrats, are pushing so heavily on the social justice, social equity, which of course, yes, is important, but they're wanting to package this bill up and have so comprehensive that everything's in it, right? Um, I think that they're doing that because they know, just like they've kind of done with this whole administration, they're going to pack in as much as they can because it's going to be ended, it's going to be discussed, it's going to be negotiated. And so they're trying to get, I think, as much as they want or they can in there before it starts to get redacted and taken out. It's kind of a political move.
Well, yes, but generally you're never going to move from a committee vote, which you're going to pass every time, to a floor vote on the Senate, unless they know they've got to win. So that's general political procedure. But in this particular circumstance, the Democrats probably would be willing to push it forward just for the political win to get the Republicans to be the ones that said no, because they
Said no, exactly. Yeah.
And so there's a possibility they push it through. But I've always said, if you really wanted to move some legislation forward, just do single targeted issues. Focus on allowing. Well, let me take a step back. I think that the way that the ultimately things are going to end is, I believe it'll be some form of the States Act. Basically, whatever if the state is legal, then the feds are going to say, we're going to allow for what's happening in that state. The difficulty will be, well, what do we do about interstate commerce? But as long as the feds are just saying that we're not federally legalizing, we're just simply saying that we're going to allow what the laws are for within that state. We're just agreeing not to prosecute. That I think is probably the easier way to go. I would like to see, the two things I'd like to see most focused on is the ability for credit cards to be processed at the dispensary, because most people don't realize this. The cash buildup is not because there's not enough banking. There's 704 banks listed on FinCEN website as of last year. We've never seen a transaction that didn't have banking in place on both our borrower or the tenant side. It's the credit cards cannot be processed at the dispensary. So you got to build up the cash there, and then they have to start using cash for everything down the line. And that becomes the problematic. And then you have to go get a cannabis friendly tier 1 bank that probably is going to charge you on your deposit that you're making, or have some higher banking fees than normal, because there's more due diligence that's necessary to board that cannabis deposit. So anyway.
Yeah, but are you being really are you being optimistic in those 2 points? Because do you really think that they're going to roll out any type of banking reform before anything else? I highly doubt that, right?
Yeah. So I'm sorry. The other, I'll finish the point off. And the other side is 280E. 280E is just crushing the entire industry. But 280E to remove that for cannabis businesses would mean that the federal government needs to offset that with an excise tax, and that becomes much more complicated to do that. But either one of those things, if you could write the law, would easily pass as standalone amendments if you could write those policies. But nobody would be willing to let those two things go through without the decriminalization or whatever it is that's necessary. So to your point, the Democrats want to lump in as much stuff as possible to show that they're trying to do all this stuff. But in reality, it's all, in my opinion, it's all for nothing. If you can't work with the people across the aisle, whether it was Republicans driving it or Democrats driving it, doesn't really matter. It's gotten so broken to this point that unless you have the executive branch, a 60 Senate majority in the Senate and the majority in the House, which is typically the first term of a new administration, you're never going to get any substantial legislation passed. And even if you had those things, I don't see any administration, whether it's Democrat or Republican, burning their political capital on such a small industry as big as we think cannabis is in a $17 trillion economy. It's really small ball.
Yeah. Well, here's what's sad to me is that it's just been politicized, and we know that it has. It's gone from the ultimate extremes, and we're seeing it play out in real time. It was completely prohibited. It was outlawed for so many years, and now that the plant has stood its time and it's superseded its time, and the efficacy of the plant has carried through, and the people are communicating this, and there's more ways to consume that content and hear about it. They're using it now, and I would say the Democrats more, because they're the ones who are in power right now. I wouldn't doubt the Republicans would do the same. But what sucks is that it's like, it's such a weird thing, because you've got Brittany Griner, who, you have the president right now trying to negotiate her release, right? When there's how many 40,000 people that are still incarcerated and don't have their records expunged or anything. So that's just an obvious tell that that's a political play that he's doing there, right? Because he's not thinking about the people here that are still disenfranchised by the plant. And just like the banking and everything else, like there's so much money that's involved and tied to this that it's just a power struggle. It's politically, and what's the ultimate thing I'll say to close with this thought is, like, it's been wrapped up, and that's the biggest disservice. Like, my biggest fear is that Biden does take action, because if he does, I'm worried, because I know what he's going to do. He's going to reschedule, not deschedule, which is completely problematic, does nothing, right? And also, like, who knows on the expungement and decriminalization front? Who knows if he's going to carry through with his promises? We know that he's lied time and time again. So it's just it saddens me a little bit, and I hope that we can break through this.
Yeah, one thing, if I've got a minute, one thing that's interesting is there's DEA licenses facilities, and we funded one of the first DEA licensed facilities, a 100,000 square foot facility. And so these licenses can actually cross state lines. They're federally legal. They can write off their taxes. They can do everything that you want to do, but they can only sell into the research market for an established market. So they actually sell the crops the year before, and then they go out and grow those crops. But it'll be interesting to see where this channel goes, because first you're going to start getting some research, and that'll be amazing to have some government research that shows what things are possible with the plant. But also, I think that that's a possibility. You're already out of, in the federal license system, you're already past a lot of those hurdles. The problem is that how do you have something that's pharmacy, can be sold in a pharmacy that's also being sold in a dispensary? So there's a disparity there that has to be thought through. And, that's, I think that the states, the way that the states have rolled out to this point, the genie's so far out of the bottle that if the federal program would have gone first, that could have been the way that it would have went, is that it just became under federal DEA license.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to live in that world. I don't know, because I mean, like, I get your point. It makes complete sense. Like, and that's a great question to pose. Like, how do you regulate something that's in a pharmacy? And I even asked that question. I was in New Mexico. Like, okay, how are they selling medical versus rec, and what are the difference in the products? Is it the potency? Is it,
There's
but
none. It's not distinguished until it's sold.
Well, I mean, in some cases, if you're a severe patient, I mean, like a cancer patient, I would imagine the potency is times 10, right? If it's a suppository or something like that, I mean, you're not, like, that would be
there. Generally cannabis is not distinguished which market it's going to until the point of purchase.
Huh.
So it would just be a higher concentrate. So we have borrowers that are making 100 milligram drinks that are ultra high concentrate. They're not for medical use, but they're so that they can just pour a cap and they can get what they're that high that they're looking for. But our facilities that we lend on, that product is typically not distinguished which lane it's going to be in most states until it's actually sold. And generally, once the state's gone recreational, the sales fall off for medical because nobody's going to bother to bust out their medical license because there's no reimbursement and there's no benefit typically for it.
Right. That's so interesting. I had no idea. Wow. You know what industry is really doing it right in terms of like just starting on the medical
Let
front
me
and
guess.
just going, you know what I'm gonna say?
Psilocybin.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
because it's
yeah.
because there was no patchwork laid out. So it's going to take the fast track, and that and ketamine. Ketamine's already got a study that's approved by the government, and so that's great because I think there's so many powerful uses for that, and so we're tracking that stuff to watch how that market's going to develop. But those markets are going to be federally approved way quicker than cannabis because just think about cannabis for just 1 second. Take a step back. Think about the Senate. Each state has 2 senators that are going to vote on that. In reality, would you really vote if you're the California senators for approving the national legalization when you're going to blow up your own state's compartmentalization where you can't cross state lines? You have a protected tax base as opposed to approving it federally. Now you have North Dakota could have the lowest tax excise for cannabis and could import it into California and crush your own market. That sounds like it makes sense, kind of, but in reality, politics comes down to only whatever is going to keep the politician in power, because they always justify to themselves, as long as I stay in power, no matter what the costs are, even if I have to change what I'm doing, then I have a chance to do the changes I want to do. But it's always so near term that you can never count on these guys for anything.
Right, which is why we see record homelessness, why we see continued war and arming countries and spending billions of dollars to fund wars and all of that. Yeah, it's super, and we've seen the playbook. It's not working, and we don't care about your reelection. At least I don't at this point. We want what's good for the people. And what's good for the people, what's interesting about cannabis and different than psilocybin, and why psilocybin's fast tracking, in my opinion, yeah, absolutely, it's gone the medical route, that it didn't have the scars of the recreational experience of cannabis, right? But psilocybin and cannabis are so different in so many ways. They're both therapeutic and there's medicinal benefit to them, but you know, psilocybin is treated therapeutically for like addiction or like trauma and like these things to really get you back on track and to have you have a reset. Cannabis, in my mind, at least the way I consume it and others that I know, it's a daily thing. We have an ECS. It's something that's biologically married to our chemistry. It helps you. It helps you alleviate stress and inflammation and anxiety, and so that's what sucks. I use the word sucks because I don't know what else to say, is that this plant that's ultimately good for you on a daily or regular basis, which I wouldn't say, I mean, in some ways psilocybin can be if you microdose, if you're that kind of person, but it's not readily available, and it's so politicized. It's such a pawn. It's such a pawn. And I can't wait 20 years from now. Hopefully I'll still be doing this podcast, and Rob will have another touch base, and we'll say, holy shit, look, we're here. Look at how it all played out. Look at how everything shook out.
I hope to have many podcasts by then, because unfortunately I think it's a 5-year horizon to get maybe where we really need to have seen. Even if we had legislation that passed right now, it would be so broadly written. Even if it passes, it still has to be consolidated between the House and the Senate and then signed off by the president. But assuming all that's just the bill passes. Then the law actually has to be written, and then there's a comment period. And so that's a couple of years away, and then an implementation period. So even if it happened today, we're looking at 3 years out. I mean, look at the Farm Bill is still working through aspects of it. So
Right.
it's not going to happen overnight. And I tell people, if you're investing in cannabis, if you're investing in cannabis for a legislative change is what how you're thinking of your thesis, do not utilize that as part of the dynamic. That is an upside that we think will happen, but look at a 5 or 10 year horizon on that. You should be making your thesis on if the investment makes sense today.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's great. Great advice. I mean, I'll leave it at that. I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to kind of leave the audience with before we wrap up, Rob?
You just reminded me of something. Just a quick short story I'd like to share.
Yeah.
There was a guy sitting next to me on an airplane, and we ended up talking. And he was a young guy, probably in his early 30s, and he had shared that he's a fully recovered brain cancer patient. And that when we were talking about what I do, he's like, I am so grateful that you're in this business. And I'm like, well, why is that? He's like, my doctor prescribed cannabis to help regenerate the nerves for my brain to reconnect. And I just can't wait for, I don't know, if that's going to happen. He was sure of it, and it seemed like that's empirical evidence. But when we start getting research that shows the things that can happen, whether it's cannabis or psilocybin, that's exciting to me. What's super exciting to me is anybody that we can get off the opiate crisis that's happening, anybody that, as opposed to taking the first opiate, tries cannabis, and that helps them get by and made it so they didn't have to start opiate. That's a win for me. And that's why when I have young child and my partners have kids, and we really had to have think that through how we felt about this. And we're like, this is we need to do this. We must do this. And yes, anything can be abused. Alcohol can be abused, but if it's done in a regulated way and it's done in a way that's helpful, I think it's going to be amazing for this country in the long run. And I think we will figure something out. I just don't know what that timeline is.
Very well said, sir. I appreciate everything, all the insights, all the information. Where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, pelorusequitygroup.com. And Pelorus is spelled differently than most people think. It's Pelorus. If you're interested in loans, you would email us at info@pelorusequitygroup.com. If you're interested in learning more about our fund and what we do, you can email IR, for short for investor relations, at pelorusequitygroup.com, and we'll be happy to send you some information. Thanks again, Kevin.
Awesome. Of course, no problem. I'll put those links and those email contact in the description box below. And Rob, let's do this again real soon. I mean, I'm sure next time we talk, there's going to be more changes, more political back and forth bullshit. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. Bye.